The message this morning is work in progress because, let's face it, none of us are finished in terms of being a product. We're all in various stages of construction, whether it's a youthful song that was sung in Texas or other words or things that we hear about. It's good to know that God is not yet finished with us, that as we go through our Christian walk, He continues to mold us and shape us and transform us into His image. Sometimes it's a little painful. Other times it's glorious. But regardless, God is not yet finished with us, and that's exactly what Paul was saying to the church in Philippi. And I'm taking now Philippians chapter 1, verse 6, as kind of the context of our message this morning. So Paul is writing the church there. And I get the impression that by virtue of what Paul is saying, they were really struggling with their own imperfections, as so many of us do all the time. And so Paul wanted to encourage them and give them hope and said, God began doing a good work in you, and I am sure He will continue it until it is finished when Jesus Christ comes again. I wanted to start the message off by telling you a little story. And in this context, try to paint for you a word picture that you can kind of maybe get your mind wrapped around. And I want you to picture a hallway in a very plush office environment. The hallway is eerily silent, except for the squeaky wheels of the mop bucket and the shuffling of the old man's feet that's pushing it. Both sound tired, and both know these floors. Oh, how many nights have I cleaned these floors? Rick mumbles to himself. He's always careful to get in the corners. He's always very thorough, always careful to set up the yellow caution sign warning of the wet floors, even though no one is around. And he's always chuckling, hey, be careful, everyone, he says to no one in particular, because it is 3 o'clock in the morning. Rick's health isn't what it used to be. Acid reflux has a tendency to kind of keep him awake, and rheumatoid arthritis gives him a bit of a limp. His hair is falling out of his head at the same rate that other hair is sprouting in places where it probably shouldn't be sprouting. His glasses are so thick that his eyeballs look almost twice their size, but Rick does his work. He is slopping soapy water on the pristine travertine tile. He's scrubbing off the heel marks left by all of the well-heeled lawyers that work at a law firm called Bicker Back and Forth. I can say that because I'm an attorney. He'll be finished long before quitting time. He always finishes early, and he's been doing this now for 20 years. And when he's finished, he'll put away his mop, and he'll put away his bucket, and he'll take a seat outside of the office of the senior partner and then wait. Rick never, ever leaves early. Oh, he could if he wanted to, because no one would ever know if he left early. But he doesn't. Because Rick broke the rules one time, and he vowed never to break the rules again. And then sometimes, if the door is open, he'll enter the partner's palatial office. He's not there very long, just to take a look. Because the truth of the matter is, the senior partner's office suite is larger than his entire apartment. He runs his fingers over the desk and strokes the leather of the soft couch there in the office. He stands at the window and watches as the gray sky turns to gold, and he remembers, I had an office like this once. But that was back in the day. That was back when Rick was known as Richard. Back when This custodian now was a senior executive. But that was a long time ago. Long before the night shift, long before the mop bucket, long before the janitor's uniform, long before the scandal. But Rick doesn't have much time to think about that anymore. There's really no reason to. He got into trouble, he got fired, and he got out. That's it. That's enough for Rick. Few people know about it. It's better that way, he thinks. There's no need to tell them. It's just his little secret. Rick's story, by the way, is a true one. Now, I've changed the names and the details just a little bit to protect the innocent. Rick is in a different job in a different century, but the story is still extremely factual. But more than a true story, it's a common story. At least I think. It's the story of a derailed dream. It's a story of high hopes colliding with harsh realities. It happens to all of us who dream. In Rick's case, it was a mistake he'd never be able to forget. It was a grave mistake. It was a capital offense kind of mistake. You see, Rick killed somebody. He saw a thug beating up an innocent man, and Rick, for whatever reason, completely lost it. So he killed the mugger. And when word got out, Rick did too. Rick would rather hide than go to jail, and so Rick ran. And in the process, this executive now became a fugitive. True story. Now, granted, most stories aren't quite as extreme as Rick's. I mean, few people spend their lives running from the law. But many of us live with regrets, don't we? For instance, I met a young man on the fourth tee of a golf course several years ago now. And he says to me, you know, I could have gone to college on a golf scholarship. Really? I said. Yeah, I had an offer right out of high school, but I decided to join a grunge band instead. Never ended up going to college. Now I'm stuck fixing garage doors. Now, if any of you fix garage doors for a living, please don't take offense. That's just what this fellow told me. Now I'm stuck. Now there's an epitaph for you, right? Now I'm stuck. An epitaph of a derailed dream. You know, you pick up any high school yearbook and read the "what are they going to do after graduation" section. Chances are you'll get dizzy breathing the thin air of all these mountaintop visions that all these graduating high school seniors wrote as their plan in life. I'm going to go to an Ivy League school, one says. I'm going to write books and live in Switzerland, another one comments. I'm going to be a doctor in a third world country, she writes. I'm going to teach inner city kids, he said. But if you take that same yearbook to your 20th high school reunion, you'll see the next chapter. Some dreams have come true, but many haven't. Not that all of them should, mind you. For instance, I hope the little guy who dreamed of playing in the NBA came to his senses. But then again, I hope he didn't lose his passion for the sport and his passion for life in that process. You see, changing direction in life is not tragic, but losing your passion for life most certainly is. It seems like something happens to us along the way. Convictions to change the world, they tend to morph into commitments to paying the bills. Rather than making a difference, we just make a living. Instead of looking forward, we have a tendency to look backward. Rather than looking outward, we start looking inward. And sometimes we don't like what we see. Rick didn't. Rick saw a man who'd settled for mediocrity, educated in the finest institutions in the world, and now working the night shift at a minimum wage job so he would not be seen during the day. But all of that changed when he heard the voice. At first, he thought this voice that he was hearing was just a joke. Because, you know, some of the fellows on the third floor, they play those tricks every once in a while. Richard, called the voice. Rick turned. No one called him Richard anymore. Richard. He turned toward his pail, and it was glowing. Bright red, hot red. In fact, he could feel the heat 10 feet away from this glowing mop pail. He stepped closer and looked in, but the water wasn't even boiling. That's strange, Rick mumbled to himself as he wanted to take another step to look closer. But then the voice that he was hearing stopped him. Don't come any closer, Richard. Take your shoes off. You're on holy tile. Suddenly, Rick knew exactly who was speaking. Yes, Lord, he said. Okay. God speaking from a hot mop bucket to a janitor named Rick? Really? You're probably thinking, Randy, you need more time away. But would it be more believable if I said that God was speaking from a burning bush to a goat roper named Moses? One day, Moses was taking care of Jethro's flock. Jethro was the priest of Midian and also Moses' father-in-law. When Moses led the flock to the west side of the desert, he came to Sinai, the mountain of God. And there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire coming out of a bush. Moses saw that the bush was on fire, but it wasn't burning up. So he said, I'll go closer to this strange thing, because how can a bush continue burning without burning up? When the Lord saw that Moses was coming to look at the bush, God called him from the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. Then God said, don't come any closer. Take off your sandals, because you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. The Lord said, I have heard the cries of my people Israel, and I have seen the way the Egyptians have made life hard for them. So now I'm sending you to the king of Egypt. Go. Bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. That's taken from Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, and then skipping forward a little bit to verses 9 and 10. Now, maybe for you, the Moses story is easier to handle because we've heard it before rather than Rick and a mop bucket. But just because it's Moses and a bush, rather than Rick and a bucket, it's no less spectacular, is it? I mean, it shocked the sandals off of Moses, right? And we wonder what amazed this old guy more. That God spoke from a bush, or that God spoke to Moses at all. Because like Rick, Moses had made a mistake. Moses had made a huge mistake. And I think you probably remember the story, don't you? He was adopted into nobility. He was an Israelite reared in an Egyptian palace. His countrymen were slaves, but Moses was privileged. He ate at the royal table. He was educated in the finest schools. Funny thing is that his most influential teacher in life had no degree at all, because his most influential teacher was his mom, a Jewish that was hired to be his nanny. Moses, you almost hear whisper to your young son, God has put you here for a reason. Someday you'll set our people free. Never forget, my son. Never, ever forget. And Moses did not forget. The flame of justice grew hotter and hotter until it was on fire. Moses saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. And just like Rick killed the mugger, Moses killed the Egyptian and then buried him. Now the next day, Moses saw the slave who had been taking the beating, whom he saved. And you would have thought that maybe that slave would have said something like, hey, thanks. But he didn't. Because rather than expressing gratitude, the slave was angry and said, are you going to kill me too? And Moses knew right then and right there that he was, as they say, in very deep yogurt. So he fled. He fled Egypt and he hid out in the wilderness, the desert. Call it a career change, if you would. He went from dining with the heads of state to counting the heads of sheep. Moses thought that his move was permanent. There's no indication in the scripture that Moses ever intended to go back to Egypt. In fact, there is every indication to lead us to believe that he wanted to stay with the sheep. Standing barefoot before the bush, he confessed in Exodus chapter 3, verse 11, I am not a great man. How can I go to the king and lead the Israelites out of Egypt? And I'm really glad that Moses asked that question. Because why him? I mean, really, why Moses? The 40-year-old version of Moses was way more appealing. The Moses we saw in Egypt was brash. He was confident. But the Moses we find some 4 decades later is reluctant and weather-beaten. Had you or I looked at Moses back in Egypt, we would have said, this guy is ready for a rumble. Trained by the ablest sources, having instant access to the inner circles of the Pharaoh, Moses spoke their language and he knew their habits. Moses at 40 was the perfect person to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. The Moses at 40 we like. But the Moses at 80? Not so much. He's too old. He's too tired. He smells like a shepherd. He speaks like a foreigner. What impact could Moses possibly have on the Pharaoh at 80 years of age? He's the wrong guy for the job. And even Moses probably would have agreed. He's probably thinking, you know, God, I tried that once before. These people don't want to be helped. Just leave me out here to tend my sheep, God, because they're a whole lot easier to lead than your people. Moses wouldn't have gone, and we wouldn't have sent him. But God did. Go figure. Benched at 40, suited up now at 80. Why? What does Moses know now that he didn't know then? What did he learn in the desert that he did not learn in Egypt? Well, one is the way of the desert itself. 40-year-old Moses is a city boy, while octogenarian Moses knows the name of every snake and the location of every watering hole in the Sinai Peninsula. And if he's going to lead hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people away from Egypt and into the wilderness, you'd think that he better know the basics of desert life 101. And family dynamics is another thing. In Egypt, he's single. And if he's going to be traveling with thousands and thousands of families for 40 years, it might help just a little bit to understand how families work. And of course, by this time, he's been married for a long time to a woman of tremendous faith. She's the daughter of a Midianite priest, no less. And now he has kids of his own. He's a family man. So maybe that's one of the things that he learned. So maybe the ways of the desert was one of the things. Maybe knowing how families work was another. But more important than perhaps the ways of the desert and the ways of the people, Moses needed to learn a little something about Moses. And now, apparently, he had learned it because God said that Moses was now ready. So to convince him, God spoke to Moses through a bush because God had to do something drastic to get his attention. And the truth is, church, you know this, God works that way sometimes. Basically, God said, Moses, school's out. Now, get to work. And poor Moses, he didn't even know he was enrolled in school, much less now a graduate. But he was, and so are we. The voice from the bush is the voice that whispers to each one of us. It reminds us that God is not finished with us yet. Oh, we may think he is. We may think we've peaked out. We may think that he's got someone else better for the job. But if that's what we're thinking, then we need to think again, because we are all unfinished work. Just a reminder of what Paul said to that struggling church in Philippi. God began doing a good work in you, and I am sure that he will continue it until it is finished when Jesus Christ comes again. Do you see what God is doing? Look at that. He's doing a good work in you, present tense. And did you hear and read when he'll be finished? When Jesus comes again. That's in the future. In other words, we're all unfinished. Your Father wants you to know that you are a work in progress. Your present has not yet met your ultimate future. And to convince you, he may just surprise you, because he works that way. He may speak through a bush. He could even speak through a bucket. The question is, church, are you listening? We have a habit of stumbling through life, being very unintentional about things that happen. I can tell you, in my brief absence from you, it was a joy and a pleasure to be able to be with my daughter and my son-in-law and my 2 grandchildren, ages 6 and 1. At 64 years of age, I had forgotten how energetic a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old can be. It was exhausting. And I hear Chandra all the time talking about the privilege of being able to see her grannies, as she calls them. And I remember that, and I'm thinking, I'm not so sure that this is such a privilege. It's work. One of the days, my family took us to the boardwalk in New Jersey, about a 45-minute to an hour trip. And I can tell you that walking along that boardwalk, I saw some of the prototypical people that I would have thought I would have seen in New Jersey, like my cousin Vinny. Hey, it's Vinny. Having a great day here on the boardwalk. Did you happen to have one of our hot dogs? And they're kind of muscling up and flexing, and all the girls are fawning all over him. I mean, it just like was straight out of Happy Days. But we walked and walked and walked and walked and walked. And then on top of all that, there are amusements at the boardwalk. So we played miniature golf. We rode in golf carts. We played games in the arcade. It was really nice. I was told that this was an exceptional time of the year where typically it's really hot and really humid. And it wasn't so hot and it wasn't so humid. And I'm grateful, because the way I felt at the end of the day, if it had been hotter or more humid, I don't know that I would have made it. And it was nice, church, to come home. It was nice to be part of the routine. It was nice to sleep in my own bed. But sometimes the routine lulls us into a sense of routineness. And we don't listen as acutely as we should when God speaks to us. He speaks to us certainly from his word, but he also speaks to us in different ways. Somebody giving you a word of encouragement, somebody doing something nice for you. Something happened in your life that's completely unexpected, and it causes you to pause and just say, there's no other explanation for that one. Thank you, God. So this week, church, don't walk through life in a coma. Appreciate each and every day that God has given to you, because it is a blessing. And tragically, we've lost several members here in a very short period of time, and it hurts, and it's painful. And yet, each day, sometimes we don't live intentionally, when if we did, we might be able to hear God speaking from something as simple as a bush or a mop bucket. Or maybe neither of those things, but something unique in your life where God gets your attention and tells you, child, I'm not finished with you yet. You're still a work in progress. Stay with me, and eventually you'll live with me too. So this week, walk through life intentionally. Listen carefully and observe accurately the things that are going on around you, and see if as God isn't speaking to you in those small moments that if you weren't paying attention, you might completely miss. So, this song, I am resolved. You're making a promise to yourself. I am resolved no longer to linger, charmed by the world's delight, is I think the beginning of the first verse. And it goes on. So we're going to sing this song. And as we do, make that resolution to yourself. Be different this week. Be intentional this week. Absorb God's blessings and perhaps his whispers through his word, through his Holy Spirit, or through circumstances that cause your life to continue to improve, because we are all in progress.